Rumor has a way of hiding in the shadows, but the truth always walks through the front door. On a gray Tuesday morning, the lobby of the Westbrook Police Department buzzed with quiet conversations, ringing phones, and the steady rhythm of officers beginning another shift. Most people barely noticed the young black woman standing patiently near the reception desk with a simple leather folder tucked beneath her arm. She wore a navy blazer, comfortable flats, and the calm expression of someone who had spent years learning that confidence did not need to announce itself. Her name was Ava Brooks, and according to the paperwork on the front counter, she was an FBI trainee assigned to a temporary interagency observation program. To nearly everyone in the building, she looked like another recruit trying to earn respect. To Officer Daniel Mercer, she looked like someone who didn't belong. Mercer had worn a badge for nearly 18 years, and he carried himself with the certainty of a man who believed experience made him untouchable. His polished boots echoed across the tile floor as he approached the front desk, slowing just enough to study Ava with a dismissive glance before letting out a quiet laugh that several nearby officers pretended not to hear. "Another trainee?" he muttered. "Guess standards keep getting lower every year." Ava looked up, meeting his eyes without anger or fear. She offered nothing more than a polite nod before returning her attention to the paperwork in front of her. That silence irritated Mercer more than any argument could have. He stepped closer, asking to see her identification even though it had already been verified by dispatch minutes earlier. Ava handed it over without hesitation. Mercer barely looked at it before tossing it back onto the counter. "Funny," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Credentials are easy to print these days." A few uneasy smiles appeared around the lobby, but nobody laughed for long. Ava simply picked up her identification, placed it back inside her folder, and thanked the receptionist for her assistance. That quiet professionalism only seemed to fuel Mercer's determination. Throughout the next hour, he appeared wherever Ava happened to be, questioning routine procedures, interrupting introductions, and making subtle remarks designed to embarrass her in front of deputies, detectives, and civilian employees. She answered every question calmly. She never raised her voice. She never reacted the way Mercer expected. By late morning, the atmosphere inside the station had changed. Conversations stopped whenever the two crossed paths. Even officers who usually joked around kept their distance, sensing that something larger was unfolding beneath the surface. Then it happened. Mercer suddenly announced that confidential evidence from an active case was missing. His voice cut through the hallway, drawing employees from nearby offices. Within seconds, he pointed directly at Ava. "Nobody leaves this hallway," he declared. "Especially her." The room fell silent. Ava slowly turned toward him, surprise flickering across her face, but disappearing almost as quickly as it came. Mercer reached into the side pocket of her unattended training bag and pulled out a sealed evidence envelope. Gasps echoed across the hallway. Several phones quietly lifted, recording without a word. Mercer held the envelope high as though the case had already been solved. "Looks like our FBI trainee has some explaining to do," he announced with unmistakable satisfaction. Every eye settled on Ava, waiting for panic, excuses, or outrage. Instead, she looked directly at Officer Daniel Mercer with remarkable composure and asked one quiet question. "Officer Mercer, are you absolutely certain this is the decision you want to make?" The silence lingered for several long seconds. Nobody reached for the evidence envelope in Daniel Mercer's hand. Nobody questioned where it had come from. Instead, every pair of eyes shifted between the veteran officer and the young FBI trainee who remained remarkably composed despite becoming the center of attention. Ava Brooks did not protest. She did not demand an attorney. She did not accuse anyone of setting her up. She simply folded her hands in front of her and waited. That patience unsettled people more than panic ever could. Mercer interpreted it differently. In his mind, silence meant defeat. He turned towards Sergeant Michael Donovan with a confident smile that suggested another easy victory. "Looks like our guest forgot that evidence has a way of finding the guilty," Mercer announced. Donovan glanced at Ava before looking back at the sealed envelope. Something about the situation felt unusually clean, almost rehearsed, yet he could not explain why. "Did anyone actually see her take this?" he asked carefully. Mercer answered before anyone else had the chance. "It was inside her bag. That is all the proof we need to begin asking questions." The hallway remained uncomfortably still. Civilian employees exchanged uncertain looks while several younger officers quietly lowered their eyes. They had witnessed Mercer make quick judgments before, but today there was an unfamiliar weight hanging over the station. Ava finally spoke, her voice calm enough to contrast sharply with the tension surrounding her. "May I ask one question before this goes any further?" Mercer folded his arms. "Go ahead." Ava looked directly at him. "Who had access to my training bag before you searched it?" The question floated through the hallway without an immediate answer. Mercer dismissed it with a shrug. "Nice try. You are changing the subject." Ava nodded slightly, as though she had expected that response. "No, Officer Mercer. I am simply trying to establish a timeline." Several detectives standing nearby exchanged quiet glances. The wording sounded precise, almost procedural. Mercer ignored the subtle shift in the room. "Take her into interview room 2, he instructed. "We will sort out the details there." Before anyone moved, Ava calmly picked up her leather folder from the reception counter. She handled it with surprising care, almost as if the ordinary folder mattered more than the accusation itself. Mercer noticed and smirked. "You will not be needing paperwork where you are going." Ava offered a polite smile. "Actually, I always keep my paperwork close." Those words meant little to everyone else, but somewhere inside the building a digital timestamp quietly recorded another passing minute. Earlier that same morning, before sunrise had painted the skyline above Westbrook, Ava had stood inside a secure federal conference room listening to instructions that only 3 people were authorized to hear. The mission briefing had been short, direct, and unusually clear. She was not being sent to impress anyone. She was not being evaluated on arrest numbers or written reports. Her assignment was simple: observe, document, never interrupt misconduct before it revealed itself completely. The target had a long history of complaints that somehow disappeared before reaching internal review. Witness statements changed. Evidence logs contained unexplained gaps. Body camera recordings occasionally failed at remarkably convenient moments. Yet no complaint had ever been enough to expose the pattern. Until now. As Ava followed the officers toward the interview room without resistance, Mercer believed he was leading another suspect into a routine investigation. What he could not see was that every decision he had made since sunrise had quietly become part of a much larger record, one that had been waiting patiently for him to write with his own choices. Interview room 2 was smaller than most people expected, with pale gray walls, a square metal table, and a single window looking into the observation hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, filling the room with an almost clinical stillness. Ava Brooks took a seat without being asked, placing her leather folder neatly on the table before folding her hands together once again. She looked less like someone facing a serious accusation and more like someone patiently waiting for an appointment to begin. Officer Daniel Mercer remained standing. He preferred it that way. Standing allowed him to dominate the room, or at least that was what he believed. He slowly circled the table while studying Ava's expression, searching for hesitation, frustration, or fear. He found none of them. That calm unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. "You have one opportunity to explain yourself," Mercer said confidently. "Tell the truth now, and this might go easier for you." Ava looked at him with quiet professionalism. "I have always intended to tell the truth." Mercer smiled, convinced that confidence would soon disappear. "Then explain why confidential evidence ended up inside your bag." Ava answered without rushing. "That depends on when the evidence entered the bag." Mercer leaned forward. "It was there when I searched it." Ava nodded once. "That was not the question." Outside the observation window, Sergeant Michael Donovan watched silently beside Detective Rachel Collins. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Rachel finally broke the silence. "She answers like an investigator." Donovan kept watching. "I noticed the same thing." Inside the room, Mercer continued pressing forward. He slid several documents across the table. "Sign a statement confirming the evidence belonged to you, and I will recommend cooperation in my report." Ava did not even touch the papers. Instead, she glanced toward the digital clock mounted above the doorway. 11:26 in the morning. Every minute mattered now. Mercer mistook the glance for nervousness. "Running out of ideas?" he asked. Ava answered with remarkable composure. "No, I was simply keeping track of time." Across town, inside a secure federal operations center, several analysts sat before a wall of monitors displaying encrypted feeds and synchronized timestamps. A live operational log quietly updated every few seconds. One line appeared in green text. Subject continues independent decision-making. No intervention required. A woman wearing a dark navy suit reviewed the incoming information without changing her expression. Supervisory Special Agent Laura Bennett closed the file in front of her and looked toward the operations team. Maintain observation, she said calmly. No contact until every required element has been documented. Back inside the station, Mercer believed he remained firmly in control. He had no idea that every conversation, every procedural shortcut, and every assumption he had made since Ava entered the building was fitting together like carefully arranged pieces of a larger investigation. He stepped toward the evidence envelope resting on the table and tapped it with one finger. "This is what ends careers," he declared. Ava finally reached for the envelope, but instead of opening it, she gently turned it until the property label faced Mercer. Her eyes remained steady. "Did you notice something unusual about this label before presenting it?" Mercer frowned. For the first time that morning, he actually looked at it instead of simply displaying it. The room grew unusually quiet. Even through the observation window, Rachel Collins leaned closer. Mercer quickly dismissed the moment and pushed the envelope aside before anyone else could study it. "Nice distraction," he said. Ava offered the faintest smile. Sometimes the smallest details decide the largest cases. Neither Mercer nor the officers outside realized that another silent timestamp had just been added to the growing record, capturing not only what had been said, but also what had been deliberately ignored. Daniel Mercer leaned back in his chair and folded his arms with the relaxed confidence of someone convinced the outcome had already been decided. The brief moment of uncertainty created by Ava Brooks's observation about the evidence label quickly disappeared from his face. In his experience, small questions never mattered once public opinion had already formed. The hallway outside had seen the envelope. The whispers had already begun. As far as he was concerned, perception would do the rest. He reached for the interview file and scribbled several notes without explaining what he was writing. Ava watched quietly, her expression unchanged. "You are very calm for someone under investigation," Mercer said without looking up. "People usually become nervous when they know the facts are against them." Ava answered in the same steady tone she had used all morning. "People also remain calm when they know the facts have not been fully examined." Mercer gave a dismissive smile. "That sounds like something they teach in federal classrooms." Ava did not respond. The silence irritated him once again. He preferred arguments because arguments could be interrupted. Silence forced him to fill the room with his own assumptions. After several more seconds, Mercer stood and gathered the evidence envelope together with Ava's training folder. "I will process these personally," he announced. "Nobody touches them until I finish my report." Sergeant Michael Donovan frowned as Mercer stepped into the hallway. "Should we log everything through evidence control first?" Mercer barely slowed his pace. "I know the procedure." Donovan watched him disappear around the corner, but something continued to bother him. Detective Rachel Collins quietly walked beside him. "Have you noticed how every question she asks is about procedure instead of defending herself?" Donovan nodded. "That is exactly what keeps bothering me." Neither of them realized that Ava had expected every one of Mercer's decisions. Several weeks earlier, inside a secure briefing room, Supervisory Special Agent Laura Bennett had reviewed a detailed behavioral profile compiled from previous complaints. One sentence had been highlighted in red. When challenged, the subject consistently bypasses standard procedure because he believes his authority will not be questioned. The recommendation beneath it was equally direct. Allow independent decision-making whenever operationally safe. Patterns require repetition before they become evidence. Back inside the interview room, Ava remained alone. She slowly adjusted the leather folder still resting on the table and glanced once more toward the clock. 11:38 in the morning. She quietly remembered Laura Bennett's final words before the assignment began. "Never rush the truth. People reveal themselves when they believe nobody is measuring their choices." Across the station, Mercer entered the property office carrying the envelope. The evidence technician looked up from a computer screen. "Do you need me to log that into the system?" Mercer shook his head without hesitation. "Not yet. I want to finish the paperwork first." The technician shrugged and returned to his work. Mercer placed the envelope on a side desk instead of inside the secured evidence locker. It seemed like an insignificant shortcut, the kind that happened every day inside busy departments. Nobody stopped him. Nobody questioned him. Hidden inside the ceiling above the property room, a security camera quietly recorded every movement. Hundreds of miles away, encrypted software automatically marked another procedural deviation and attached the exact time to an expanding operational file. No alarms sounded. No agents rushed through the doors. Everything remained remarkably ordinary. That was precisely why the investigation had succeeded for so long. Mercer believed he was controlling the narrative one decision at a time. He never realized that with every shortcut he chose, he was slowly replacing suspicion with proof. By noon, the entire station had settled into an uneasy routine, yet beneath the ordinary sounds of ringing telephones and quiet conversations, an invisible clock continued counting down. Officer Daniel Mercer walked through the hallways with the confidence of someone who believed every decision had strengthened his case. He greeted a few colleagues, exchanged casual remarks, and carried himself as though the morning had confirmed everything he had suspected. To anyone watching from a distance, he appeared completely comfortable. That confidence was exactly what Ava Brooks had expected. Inside interview room 2, she remained alone except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. She did not pace. She did not rehearse explanations. Instead, she carefully reviewed the sequence of events in her mind, matching each moment to the timeline she had memorized before entering the building. Every question Mercer had asked, every shortcut he had taken, every instruction he had given without following standard procedure had quietly become another piece of a much larger picture. She remembered the final page of her operational briefing. It contained only one sentence: "Let conduct become evidence." That principle had guided every decision she made throughout the morning. She had never come to challenge Mercer with accusations. She had come to watch him make choices that no one forced him to make. Meanwhile, Sergeant Michael Donovan stood outside the interview room reading the preliminary incident report Mercer had begun preparing. Something immediately caught his attention. The timeline listed the evidence as being discovered before the property office had officially recorded the missing item. Donovan checked the digital log again, thinking he had misread it. The timestamps did not align. He quietly approached Detective Rachel Collins and pointed to the screen. Rachel studied the entries for several moments before speaking in a low voice. That sequence should not be possible. Donovan nodded slowly. Unless something happened before the report was written. Neither officer jumped to conclusions, but the first small crack had appeared in what had seemed like a simple case only an hour earlier. Across town, Supervisory Special Agent Laura Bennett received another secure update. The operational dashboard displayed a growing list of procedural deviations, each marked with precise times, locations, and corresponding surveillance records. No one celebrated. No one declared success. Bennett simply read the newest entry before saying, "Continue observation. The pattern is becoming consistent." Back inside the station, Mercer returned to the interview room carrying a fresh copy of his report. He placed it on the table with visible satisfaction. "This is your opportunity to cooperate," he said. "Once this report is submitted, everything becomes official." Ava looked at the document, but made no attempt to read it. Instead, she looked at Mercer with the same calm expression she had worn since arriving that morning. "Official records deserve accurate timelines," she replied. Mercer gave a brief laugh. "You are still worried about the clock." Ava answered gently, "No, Officer Mercer. I am thinking about the people who will eventually compare every clock." For the first time all day, Mercer did not respond immediately. The sentence lingered in the room longer than he expected. Outside the closed door, unnoticed by nearly everyone inside the station, two professionally dressed visitors stepped through the main entrance and quietly identified themselves at the front desk before waiting with remarkable patience. They did not interrupt anyone. They did not announce why they had come. They simply watched the station with practiced attention, knowing that sometimes the final piece of the truth arrived only after everyone believed the story had already been written. The atmosphere inside the Westbrook Police Department had changed in ways that were difficult to explain but impossible to ignore. Conversations ended when Officer Daniel Mercer walked past. Deputies who normally filled the hallways with casual jokes suddenly found reasons to stay behind their desks. Nobody openly challenged him, yet an invisible tension had settled over the building. Mercer interpreted the silence as respect. In reality, It was uncertainty. Sergeant Michael Donovan continued comparing the digital activity logs with the preliminary report lying on his desk. The more carefully he examined the sequence of events, the less sense it made. The evidence envelope had supposedly been discovered before the official inventory reflected that it was missing. Access records showed unusual movement between rooms that morning. None of those details proved misconduct by themselves, but together they formed a pattern that demanded explanation. Detective Rachel Collins quietly joined him once again. "Have you noticed something else?" she asked. Donovan nodded without taking his eyes off the monitor. Every unusual entry points back to the same timeline. Rachel looked toward the closed interview room across the hallway, and she never once argued about the accusation. Donovan slowly closed the report. "No." She kept asking about procedures. Inside interview room 2, Ava Brooks remained as composed as she had been since arriving that morning. She looked briefly at the clock. 12:14 in the afternoon. Every passing minute brought the operation closer to its final stage. She remembered the first day of her federal training, when an instructor had written a single sentence across a whiteboard. "Facts speak louder when people believe nobody is collecting them." At the time, it had sounded like a simple lesson in patience. Today, sitting quietly inside a local police station, she understood exactly what those words meant. Across the city, inside the Federal Operations Center, Supervisory Special Agent Laura Bennett stood before a large display showing synchronized timestamps from multiple verified sources. Security camera recordings, access control logs, dispatch records, and observation notes aligned with remarkable precision. Another analyst reviewed the latest update before looking toward Bennett. "The required threshold has almost been met," he said. Bennett gave a calm nod. "Wait for the final independent action. The operation ends only when the pattern completes itself." Back at the station, Mercer stepped into the property office once again. Believing he was simply strengthening his case, he adjusted paperwork, handled the evidence envelope without requesting a witness, and added handwritten notes intended to support his version of the morning's events. He never noticed the property technician quietly documenting each transfer according to department policy. He never considered that every security camera inside the building used the same synchronized clock. To him, they were ordinary administrative details. To someone reviewing the full record, they would become a precise timeline that could not easily be disputed. As Mercer walked back toward the interview room, he passed the front lobby without paying attention to the two professionally dressed visitors who had been waiting patiently for several minutes. They exchanged a brief glance after recognizing him, but neither moved. Their calm demeanor reflected the same discipline Ava had demonstrated throughout the day. They were not there to interrupt the story. They were there to witness its final chapter. Mercer opened the interview room door with the confidence of a man who believed every decision had brought him closer to victory. He did not realize that somewhere beyond those walls, every clock had finally reached the same moment, and the truth he had spent years avoiding was only a few steps away from walking through the front entrance. The door to interview room 2 opened with a quiet click, and Daniel Mercer stepped inside, carrying his report as though the day had already reached its conclusion. He placed the papers neatly on the table and looked at Ava Brooks with the confidence that had guided every decision he had made since sunrise. "This is your final opportunity," he said evenly. "Once I file this report, the process moves forward." Ava looked at the report for only a moment before lifting her eyes toward the wall clock. 12:23 in the afternoon. She smiled politely, not because she believed she had won, but because she knew the waiting was almost over. "You should probably wait another minute," she said softly. Mercer frowned. "Why would I do that?" Ava answered without hesitation. "Because timing matters." Before Mercer could respond, a firm knock echoed from the hallway. Sergeant Michael Donovan opened the interview room door slightly and spoke in an unusually formal tone. "Officer Mercer, there are federal officials here requesting immediate access." Mercer barely glanced toward the doorway. "Tell them they can wait. I am finishing an interview." Donovan remained standing where he was. "They specifically requested both of you." The room fell silent. Ava calmly folded her hands together while Mercer let out an impatient sigh. "Fine," he said. "Bring them in." Seconds later, two professionally dressed agents entered the room, followed by a woman in a dark navy suit whose calm presence immediately changed the atmosphere. She carried no visible urgency, only quiet authority. She stopped beside the table and looked first at Ava, then at Mercer. "Good afternoon," she said. "I am Supervisory Special Agent Laura Bennett." Mercer straightened his posture. "This is an active departmental investigation. You will need authorization before interfering." Bennett reached into her portfolio and placed a sealed federal authorization letter on the table. "Authorization has already been granted." Mercer glanced at the document without picking it up. "What exactly is this about?" Bennett answered with measured precision. "An ongoing federal integrity investigation." Mercer gave a short laugh. "Then you are in the wrong room. We are dealing with stolen evidence." Bennett slowly turned toward Ava. "Agent Brooks." Ava stood, maintaining the same calm expression she had worn throughout the day. "Ma'am." Mercer looked from one woman to the other, confusion replacing certainty for the first time. "Agent." Bennett nodded. "Yes. Ava Brooks has been serving as an undercover federal trainee assigned to observe procedural compliance during a joint operational assessment." The words settled over the room like absolute silence. Donovan and Rachel Collins exchanged stunned looks through the open doorway. Mercer stared at Ava, searching for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, but her composure never changed. Bennett continued. "Everything that occurred today has been documented through synchronized operational records, departmental security systems, authorized observation protocols, and official evidence logs." Mercer finally found his voice. "You cannot seriously believe that." Bennett met his eyes without raising her voice. "Belief is unnecessary when the record speaks for itself." She opened her portfolio and removed several neatly organized folders, each marked with matching timestamps. "Your decisions this morning were made independently. Nobody instructed you to bypass evidence procedures. Nobody instructed you to disregard chain of custody. Nobody instructed you to ignore departmental safeguards. Those choices were entirely your own." Mercer looked toward Ava once more, finally understanding why she had never argued, never defended herself, and never reacted with anger. She had not been waiting for someone to rescue her. She had been waiting for the truth to finish introducing itself. No one spoke for several long seconds after Supervisory Special Agent Laura Bennett finished explaining the operation. The silence inside Interview Room 2 was heavier than any argument could have been. Daniel Mercer stood motionless, his unfinished report still resting on the table in front of him. Only moments earlier, he had believed that document would define the day's events. Now it had become little more than another item waiting to be examined alongside every other decision he had made. Laura Bennett calmly opened the first folder and placed several printed timelines across the table. Each page contained synchronized timestamps taken from independent sources throughout the station. Security cameras, building access records, evidence management logs, dispatch communications, property room activity. Every system recorded the same morning from a different angle, and together they formed a single, uninterrupted sequence. Each record has already been verified, Bennett explained. None of these systems depend on the others. Their consistency is what gives them value. Mercer looked from one document to another, searching for an error that never appeared. Sergeant Michael Donovan stepped closer, quietly comparing the printed timeline with the incident report Mercer had prepared. The discrepancy he had noticed earlier was now impossible to ignore. The report described events in an order that no longer matched the independently verified records. Detective Rachel Collins slowly exhaled as the realization settled over her. What had first seemed like isolated procedural shortcuts had become a pattern visible across the entire day. Bennett continued without raising her voice. This operation did not begin this morning. It began months ago after repeated complaints revealed the same concerns involving evidence handling, procedural consistency, and unequal treatment during enforcement activities. Individual reports raised questions. Repeated patterns created reasonable grounds for a formal review. Today's operation was designed to determine whether those patterns would continue without outside influence. Ava Brooks remained standing quietly beside the table. She said nothing because nothing needed to be added. Every question she had asked throughout the morning now made sense to everyone in the room. She had never argued about accusations because the investigation had never depended on winning an argument. It depended on documenting decisions exactly as they happened. Bennett turned toward Ava with a small nod of professional respect before addressing the room once more. Agent Brooks followed every instruction provided during the assignment. She did not provoke misconduct. She did not encourage procedural violations. She simply observed and documented independent choices. Mercer finally spoke, although his confidence had disappeared. "You planned this." Bennett answered immediately. "No, Officer Mercer. We planned an observation. Your decisions determined the outcome." The distinction settled heavily over everyone listening. Nobody in the room could point to a moment when Mercer had been forced to bypass procedure. Nobody could identify a single instruction directing him to ignore safeguards or make assumptions. Those choices had belonged entirely to him. Bennett carefully closed the folders before speaking one final time. "Effective immediately, all related materials will be transferred for formal federal and departmental review under established investigative procedures. Your access to evidence connected to this matter is suspended pending that review." Mercer looked around the room, hoping someone would challenge the announcement or question the documentation. No one did. Even the officers gathered outside the doorway remained silent, not because they were celebrating, but because the evidence had answered every question before anyone else needed to. For the first time that day, the authority inside the room no longer belonged to the loudest voice. It belonged to the facts, recorded one decision at a time. Rain had begun to fall by the time the formal review team completed the initial transfer of records. Through the large windows of the Westbrook Police Department, the afternoon sky reflected across the wet pavement, turning the parking lot into a mirror of quiet gray light. Inside the station, the usual sounds slowly returned. Telephones rang again. Computer keyboards clicked. Conversations resumed in careful voices. Yet nothing felt quite the same. The events of a single morning had changed the atmosphere of an entire building. Supervisory Special Agent Laura Bennett finished organizing the final case files before thanking Sergeant Michael Donovan and Detective Rachel Collins for their professionalism during the review. Neither officer celebrated what had happened. Both understood that accountability was never about embarrassment. It was about protecting the integrity of every honest person who wore a badge with respect for the law. Donovan looked toward Ava Brooks with quiet admiration. "You stayed calm through all of it," he said. Ava smiled gently. The investigation was never about proving who could speak the loudest. It was about allowing the facts enough time to speak for themselves. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that now." Bennett handed Ava her official credentials, which had remained secured throughout the operation. "Your assignment is complete," she said. "Excellent work." Ava accepted them with a simple thank you. There was no dramatic celebration, no applause, and no sense of personal victory. The mission had never been about defeating one individual. It had always been about strengthening public trust by ensuring that procedures existed for a reason and that no one stood above them. As Ava walked through the front lobby, several employees who had witnessed the morning quietly stepped aside. Earlier that day, many of them had watched her become the subject of suspicion. Now they watched her leave with the same calm dignity she had carried from the moment she first entered the building. She paused briefly near the reception desk where her morning had begun. The receptionist offered an apologetic smile. Ava returned it warmly. "Thank you for treating me with kindness," she said. "Small acts of professionalism matter more than people realize." Outside, the rain had softened into a light drizzle. Ava stepped onto the sidewalk and looked back at the station one final time. The building itself had not changed. The badge above the entrance remained exactly where it had always been. What had changed was the reminder that every badge carried two responsibilities at the same time. It represented authority, but it also demanded accountability. Neither could exist without the other. Across the parking lot, Laura Bennett joined Ava beneath the covered entrance. "What did you learn?" she asked quietly. Ava thought for a moment before answering. Most people believe the truth arrives with dramatic speeches. It usually arrives with accurate records, patient observers, and ordinary people who choose to follow the rules even when nobody appears to be watching. Bennett smiled. "That is why these investigations matter." Together they walked toward the waiting vehicle as the afternoon clouds slowly began to break apart. Behind them, the station continued its work under a renewed understanding that trust is not protected by power alone. It is protected by character, consistency, and the courage to let the truth be measured instead of assumed. And on that quiet afternoon, one lesson echoed more clearly than any accusation ever could. A badge may give someone authority for a season, But only integrity allows that authority to earn lasting respect.